Remember the story last week here on the Jam where we talked about the North Koreans firing off another one of those intercontinental ballistic missiles? Well, it turns out that the president of the U.S. was watching and saw this and decided to break out some fighting words. So the giant story of the week seems to be taking place on the playground of who can make the biggest threat, Donald Trump or Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump started the week out by warning North Korea that they best not make any more threats on the U.S. or he will unleash fire and fury, the likes of which the world has never seen. Then a few days later, he further escalated his threats by saying military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded in case North Korea acts unwisely. When Trump was asked about the fire and fury comment and that maybe it was a little reckless, Trump responded that maybe his comment wasn't tough enough, that the Kim Jong-un and his family has been getting away with stuff for far too long, and that he, Trump, unlike his predecessors, is going to put a stop to it. Of course, the question everyone is asking is, what words would he use that are tougher than fire and fury? Maybe death and destruction, or wild and crazy? In response to these threats from Donald Trump, North Korea said Trump was driving the situation on the Korean Peninsula to the brink of nuclear war. The North Korean official went on to say the U.S. would suffer a shameful defeat and final doom if it persists in extreme military adventures, sanctions, and pressure. It vowed to mercilessly wipe out the provocateurs, making desperate efforts to stifle North Korea. On Thursday, North Korea state media said military leaders were working on a proposal to launch 4 intermediate-range Hwasong-12 missiles. Now, we have talked about those missiles here before on the show. They're going to put those in the sea about 25 miles off the coast of Guam. Supposedly, it would take about 14 minutes for a missile to reach Guam from North Korea. That's if everything goes perfectly and it gets through all those U.S. layers of defense. Now, other people in the White House have tried to play down the Trump statements. Defense Secretary General Mattis warned that the U.S. military was ready to take action, but said diplomatic efforts were the priority. He said, "The American effort is diplomatically led, it has diplomatic traction, and it is gaining diplomatic results. The tragedy of war is well enough known. It doesn't need another characterization beyond the fact that it would be catastrophic." Also, one of Trump's aides said that the statement of fire and fury was not vetted language from Trump and that people should really not read too much into it. While Trump's deputy assistant came on Fox News and said that North Korea should not test Donald Trump, that the U.S. is no longer just a superpower, but is now a hyperpower. I'm not really sure what a hyperpower is. It's been suggested that maybe it's like when other guitar amps go up to 10, but yours goes up to 11. John McCain, one of the leading Republican senators, was asked about the statement coming from Trump, in which he responded, "I don't know what he's saying. Long ago, I've given up trying to interpret what he says." But all these war of words has a couple people very nervous. Russia has boosted its air defense systems in the Far East. The Japanese Ministry of Defense was deploying a land-based missile inception system known as PAC-3 to 4 different locations, including 3 named by the North Koreans as under the flight path of the proposed strike to Guam. Now Russia has stepped up and has called for everyone to please calm down. On Friday, the foreign minister said that his country was working on a plan with China called double freezing, and that will address this big threat. Basically, what it means is that Kim Jong-un would freeze any nuclear tests and any ballistic missile tests that are launched, and that the U.S. would freeze any large-scale military exercises. The foreign minister said, "I believe that when it almost reaches the point of a fight, the one who is stronger and smarter must take the first step away from the dangerous line." Of course, the biggest question is, what is China's role going to be in all this? They are, of course, Korea's biggest ally and largest trading partner, but they have come under increasing pressure to intervene on this matter. The Global Times in China said China would not stay neutral, warning that it may not support North Korea if they make the first move, but goes on to say that if the U.S. were to strike first, that China would intervene. So, if a conflict begins, whose side is China going to fall to? And for that matter, who will Russia side with? So right now, as it stands, Russia and China are going to be the possible peacemakers in all of this. Who saw that coming? Boy, sometimes you really can't predict these things. Analysts say that all these threats are very unhelpful in resolving the situation. The U.S. president threatens people all the time. It's just his style of management. In the past, he will say all kinds of crazy things just to get a reaction, but now he's dealing with someone who doesn't really know this game. He doesn't really seem to understand how this game of threats works. You know, the other president makes a threat, then you make a threat, and then everyone throws their weight around, yada, 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 and then no one really does anything. However, this young North Korean doesn't seem to know this game. Trump is using catchy phrases like fire and fury and locked and loaded and something the world has never seen. Nothing really specific, but very catchy. North Korea came back and said, "We will send a missile 25 miles off the coast of Guam, and here's the flight time and the range of the missile." Now, everyone is saying, wait, what? That's pretty specific. I think this was very unexpected by the U.S. I mean, Korea has been testing missiles for decades. It's what they do. In 2006, 2009, 2013, 2016, they have always said they are protecting their country. But now, Trump has made these threats at them. So, what if they do their missile tests like they have been doing for years? Why is the U.S. now saying it will respond with military force? Is the U.S. president making these off-the-cuff remarks to sound tough? Why all of a sudden is he making all these threats when this has been going on for years? I mean, could it be that the Defense Intelligence Agency report that was leaked to the Washington Post that said North Korea had successfully produced a miniaturized nuclear warhead that can fit inside missiles? However, so far there has been no proof about that report, and the agency actually made the same report back in 2013, which also later turned out to be incorrect. It didn't make big news back then because Obama's people didn't believe it. So, is it possible that all these new threats coming from the United States president that were not vetted or prepared, but rather just blurted out during a meeting that was actually supposed to be on the opioid crisis, are all because of an unsubstantiated report? You know, no other intelligence agency or other country has said or made any acknowledgement related to this report. Also, let me just read something that was put out by North Korea. It says, if the U.S. goes reckless, misjudging the trend of the times and the strategic position of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, all the U.S. military bases in the operational theater in the Pacific, including Guam, will face ruin in the face of an all-out and substantial attack to be mounted by the Army of North Korea. Now, that statement was actually not made last week. That statement was made last year. North Korea makes these kind of threats all the time. They test missiles all the time. What is different these days is what's coming out of the U.S. It's one thing when the U.S. says it's going to sanction a country to help out its adversaries, but it's not like the U.S. to just come off the cuff and make freewheeling statements threatening an all-out war with fire and fury to which the world has never seen. So, what would happen if the U.S. went to war with North Korea? Who would win? Experts have said it's not a question of who would win, but how many days it would last before the U.S. would destroy, then take over North Korea. North Korea has one of the largest militaries in the world. However, the impressive numbers and size they may have has a problem when it's having to fight someone like the U.S. As far as their naval fleet, they have 810 naval vessels. Sounds pretty impressive, but most of those boats can go no more than 50 miles from shore. They have no aircraft carriers, no destroyers, and only 3 frigates, which are absolutely no match for the U.S. Navy. They also have around 70 submarines. However, they're very old, and all of them use diesel propulsion systems that were designed in the 50s and 60s. And those can only operate maybe 30 miles off the Korean coast. And they're very loud, so easily detected by U.S. submarines and special equipped aircrafts. Controlling the airspace in the war is very important. And North Korea has more than 500 combat aircrafts. However, they're very old planes, some 4th generation back. They do have about 40 MiG-29s, but this is still considered old aircraft. Their aircraft is also supposedly plagued with many mechanical problems, making about half of the aircraft unflyable. Also, the U.S. fly F-22s and F-35s, which the North Korea would have extreme problems trying to go up against. You know, their planes just don't have the ability to go up against another plane like that. In fact, they probably most likely won't even be able to see the U.S. planes until they've already been shot down. But one thing North Korea has is soldiers. 1.2 million active soldiers and 7.7 million in reserve, making it one of the largest armies in the world. And they have 200,000 special ops soldiers, which are special and highly trained. But here again, the big problem is their guns and fighting supplies. Very, very old. Some of them date back to pre-Cold War times. They have very few tanks, and most of them are T-72 tanks, dating back to the Soviet era, I think in the 1960s, if I remember right. They have T-62s, which actually date back to the 1960s. They have problems with supplies, but also food. You know, during a war, how are they going to feed this massive army? One other big problem North Korea has is currently they have no friends. Used to be China, but even they aren't supporting them. China has always been their closest ally, but ever since Kim Jong-un took over power, the relationship with China is not quite as strong. So if war breaks out, North Korea won't have anyone to help. Unlike the US has Japan and South Korea, North Korea spends 1/4 of its entire economy on its military and its missile programs, of course. However, the technology it's been able to acquire is so old that against the US, it really would not stand much of a chance. So, if the US has such a superior military and very modern technology, why don't they just invade North Korea like they did in Iraq and just get it over with? Well, there actually may be a couple reasons for this, and one of them is Seoul. Seoul is one of the largest, most densely populated cities in the world, and it's only 35 miles from the North Korean border. Just on the other side of the border, North Korea has over 10,000 pieces of artillery. They would be able to launch a huge-scale attack on the city, causing huge amounts of deaths and destruction of property and infrastructure before the U.S. could find them all. Experts predict that the U.S. could blow them all up, but what about all the damage they could cause before that happened? Also, many of these pieces are hidden in the mountains, and they have anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles guarding them. Also, South Korea relatively has a very small army compared to North Korea's massive one. The North could easily cross the borders in any number of ways and could overwhelm the South Koreans. Supposedly they have tunnels and mini submarines as a way to get into the country and deploy chemical weapons, biological weapons, even possibly a dirty bomb. There's also numerous sleeper cells planted in South Korea just waiting for the right time to become active and set off bombs and create havoc. But the biggest problem facing the US is that North Korea might just have a nuclear missile. With all the anti-missile defense systems and counter-missile technology there are, this is just something you can't get around. If North Korea could just get one of those missiles to hit a target, it would be devastating. Yes, the US could wipe them off the face of the map and could kill everyone in the country, but the North Koreans could cause enough damage with one single missile that would make the US hold off on its advances. So far as we can tell, North Korea has only tested its missiles, however, has not yet tested an intercontinental ballistic weapon with a nuclear warhead on it. This is not a really simple thing, you understand. First, you have to shrink it down, and it has to be very durable. It has to be able to go into the upper atmosphere, then it has to survive re-entry. It's not clear yet that North Korea has this or will have it anytime soon. However, it is believed that they are able to put a nuclear warhead on a short-range missile and shoot it at a US ally that is close, such as those in Asia and Southeast Asia. In the end, the US would quickly establish the air superiority while ground forces would bypass the demilitarized zone. Once the artillery and missile batteries were taken out, the advanced technology, mobile armor, helicopter support, air power would quickly overwhelm the large infantry formations and their old WW2 era tactics. But what North Korea would be able to accomplish before that happened? And lastly, what would happen after this very short war? North Korea will most likely be devastated. Not just thousands, but millions of starving refugees trying to cross the border into South Korea. How would they deal with the current backward society that is currently North Korea? There are estimates that the cost of the war could reach $2 trillion in the aftermath. So, to put a cap on this story, maybe it might be a good idea if everyone just skips the war part and just keeps throwing their threats of fire and fury. It's very entertaining with lots of drama and intrigue, but hey, no one gets blown up.